If you have a question, if you have a question, do it in the chat. I'll try to monitor that and let Kristen know.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to, if I can find it. I've got too many windows open. Like that's never happened before. Oops. Let me share the screen. There we go. And we did make a nice video for you, Professor Manzano, myself, about how to just some basic introduction to the course and basic navigation. So hopefully that helps you, and you can go ahead, you know, probably after 1 second, you won't need it, but it was a nice little intro to the course. So you are welcome to go back to that. A couple things, and it seems like everyone did this perfectly, so congrats. Our Zoom links will always be right here in the Confer Zoom, so you can click on that like you probably did and hit join. And oh, Gretchen appreciates the video. Yep, so we'll make it easy for you with the Confer Zoom, and they're already all scheduled. And then as well, Professor Manzano has, I'm in the wrong class, for the love. You guys, Rick, someone, I'm like, I am a hot mess. Hold on. You're like, what class is she in? I was in the wrong class. It's fine. Fine. Details. At any rate. So, but the Confer Zoom link will have everything. And then what's nice is Professor Manzano as well. He's got in each module the link, you know, the Confer Zoom link there for you as well. So pretty easy. And you already know, Rick, you want to remind them what they're working on for this week right now?
Sure. This week, it's a little bit is to get introduced to each other, which is what we're doing. So we have the Who Am I discussion. And the way I do all the discussions, and those of you that have had me in other classes know how this works, is in the title of the discussion, I give you the first post date, which for the Who Am I is the 25th, and then the date the discussion closes. Now understand that after the discussion closes, you can't add anything to it. It's done. It's no longer available. So be sure that you do post during that time period so that I can give you credit for it. If you're ever not sure how I will be grading a particular discussion, if you will go to the very top of the discussion, there is what we call a hamburger. I just learned that term last week. Which is the 3 little dots in the top right-hand corner. If you click on that, see where it says Show Rubric, and when you click on that, this is what I use to grade. The first one is basically, and everyone has this, time management. Let me just explain that to you guys real quick. The thought process, and those of you working in law offices, chime in if I'm wrong. One of the most important things in a law office is deadlines. In one of my classes, I actually posted a case study where the court canceled a case because the filing was 15 minutes late. 15 minutes. Yeah, so that's how, you know, that means your next step is to call your insurance company and report the fact that you probably are going to have a major claim against you because you missed a deadline of some sort. You don't want to have to handle with that. So what I'm trying to get a work ethic going where you don't wait till the last minute to do things. So if you actually post things at least the day before the deadline, I give you extra credit, 5 extra credit points. And those can help in case you miss something later on. You've got a little buffer there to help you because we do want to give every single one of you an A. Doesn't happen, but it is our goal and it's something we're working for. So I want to give you, if you're really doing the work, that little bit of buffer. So always do that. And then in this one, it's just, did you do the post? Did you respond? Did you participate? Everyone's doing a great job so far. So you'll get the, probably the 105 points because you'll all post before Wednesday. Other ones, I usually maybe break the post up and the, what I call the reply or the responsiveness portion. And the way you can get extra credit there is the more you actively participate in the discussion, the more I'm willing to give you in points. Because to me, the probably one of the most important parts of any online learning scenario is the discussion portion where you exchange information back and forth and get involved with the other students in the class. So please participate as much as you can in the discussion. Can we go back to the module so I can see that? Because I don't have any memory on
Hey,
anything.
Mr. Manzano,
Yes, sir.
maybe I don't know if it's just me, but on the Who I Am, I got it posted for 9/25 and closed at 9:30, which would be next month. Should it be August?
Ah, thank you. That's why you should have paralegals. We will change that. It's 8:25 and
Okay.
closes 8. Actually, it should be the 26th. See, it's Wednesday, everybody, and it closes Sunday. That's my normal pattern, but always check, because sometimes we in some of the classes in Module 8 we have. For example, in the, I think it was the 101 or 121 where we're doing a memo, there was a couple of little short discussions, so you can't always go on that. But usually things are due every Sunday in a 16-week class, or when we do it in the 8-week format, it's Wednesday and Sunday, because we do exactly the same work if we were to do this in an 8-week format. This class we wouldn't, because there's too much for it. But during the summer 121 and 101, it was, yeah, I see some shake of the hands. Every Wednesday and every Sunday you had something to do. Okay, yeah, we'll change that. Thank you for catching that. Yeah, if you ever see any dates and stuff, because you know what the problem is I have the calendar here and I have September open. It should be August when I was doing that module. At least I got the other dates right. Okay. As you notice, I do have the correct due date, because when you look on the module where it says August 25 underneath the, no, on the module itself, when you looked at the module, it actually had August 25th as the little due date. That's what that is in there, because if you turn it in on the 26th, it's going to pop and say late for me, so that I don't have to go through and check when did you actually do your first post. So the due date for the discussions is always the first post date, and I did get that part right, so I'll go back and correct that. Everything else is due Sunday. Now understand, we're doing things a little different in Module 2, because as you notice, the reading and the other things are all due by Sunday of the end of this week, because this is the week you're getting up to speed and things of that nature. The rest of the modules, the reading is due by 6, because there's a little quiz attached to it. A little is due by 6 p.m. the day of class, because we want you to read and have that material read prior to class. That way the lecture will make a lot more sense to you and everything will sink in. So starting with Module 2, make sure you have the preparation done before class. We call that flipping the classroom. You read the material and you come prepared to class. We then take and do something with it in each one of the class sessions. And we'll do that starting with Module 2 from that point on. Any reading or things of that nature for that module will be due prior to Monday night's class. Basically, I also have a pulse taking survey in Module 1. Just a few questions that I'd like you to answer for me. There aren't any points attached to it. It's so, just so you know, this is the first semester we're teaching the course in this format. We're completely revamping the course. We're aligning it very closely with the PARA246, the advanced research class. We've had consultations with James Harmon, who teaches that. And we're using the flipped classroom module, which we're doing here. So what we'd like to, little feedback from you there. I'll give you another opportunity at Module 8, I mean the Module 4, and again at the end in Module 8, we'll have the end of the course survey. Okay, that's this week.
Okay, so I love it, you guys. We're we're gonna have a lot of fun for this class. So just today, we're just doing a little introduction. You know, that's this kind of Module 1 is really just an introduction to the course, you know, to each other. So we've got some just little mini slides here, is what I would call it, posted up. Let me see if I can get this going here. Can you guys let me know, put a 1 in the chat box if you can see the slides, because sometimes they take a second to load. Are the slides showing? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm not going to ask any silly questions. in this class. So I'm just kidding. You know I am. So anyway, this is just our little, intro here. So what is legal research? Like that's the phrase you hear, legal research. Well, obviously it's research that's focused on legal materials. So it's similar to other research you've done or you've imagined. So many of you have already associate's degrees or bachelor's degrees. It's similar to all that kinds of same research that you would do, a library-based research where you're using books. What makes it legal as opposed to just regular old research is simply that you are using legal materials, legal sources. And so that's where the key difference is, instead of just pulling what you would call periodicals, magazines, newspapers, scientific journals, you're pulling legal research materials, legal journals, statutes, all those other things. So it's nothing to be, stressed out about. It's just specialized form of research. So then what makes up very broadly legal research? These specialized tools and sources. And what's cool is basically we have modules that will take you through, and we'll be going through each one of these in depth. So you've got constitutions, right? We have a United States Constitution, and we have a California Constitution, a Texas Constitution, a Michigan, each state has one. So constitutions, you might also think of them as founding documents, right? Bill of Rights, things like that. Statutes, this is a little refresher for some of you if you've had 100 already. Statutes, of course, are laws passed by legislative bodies, okay? And you have them at the federal level, at the state level. You also even have county, city kind of statutes, ordinances. Then we have cases. A lot of people, this is maybe what you think of first when you think of legal research. I'm going to go read Brown versus Board of Education, or what are some of the big cases that just came out? I can't even think, like from the last term. Holy cow. Someone chat a case that just came out from the most recent term. I can't think. But anyway, all the famous, Supreme Court cases that are out there. Roe versus Wade, Heller versus DC, Citizens United, whatever. I can't think of anything from the most recent term. But, so yeah, Oberfell. Thank you, Raquel. Great. I know. I was like, I know there's another one. Oberfell. So, Loving versus Virginia, right? So sometimes that's the only thing you think of when you think of legal research, cases, and that is certainly a huge part of legal research, but it's not the only part, right? So we'll be focusing on all these different aspects. So that's awesome. We also have administrative regulations. Sometimes people are like, administrative regulations. This would be things like IRS rules, immigration. A couple of you mentioned you wanted to learn or end up working in immigration law. Much of immigration is governed by administrative agencies, and those agencies create or promulgate, that's the big word, promulgate, create rules. So the same way a legislative body passes a law, an administrative agency creates a rule. Legal encyclopedias. So we actually have specialized legal encyclopedias, just similar to old school, Britannica. I don't even think anyone has seen one of those, or new school Wikipedia. There is legal encyclopedia, which is exactly what it sounds like. Giant books that you just kind of like look up a topic and you open it up and you get to read it. So super fun. Then we have legal treatises, which again, very similar. So these, some of you, bankruptcy, contracts, some other areas of law, it's almost like they took an encyclopedia and instead of having a 20-page entry on bankruptcy, they have 20 volumes on bankruptcy. And it's just so in depth that they've called it a treatise, okay? And if you're in certain areas of the law, you'll work with these and know these, but otherwise you might not ever encounter a treatise outside of academic. And then law reviews. So these are the academic journal articles that are written often by law professors or lawyers, usually associated with law schools, the Harvard Law Review or the Yale Law Review, the UCLA Law Review, and academic explorations of current legal issues, really diving deep on a case or some sort of theory of law. And again, they're used and looked at. So we'll be going through so many of these in depth and kind of showing you how you find these and how you do legal research in those areas. And looks like Rick's on the chats. Great. So, you know, what makes legal research a little different? And some of this kind of backs into the end goal and also how the court does what it does. So you have to keep in mind, at the end of the day, your goal is to get the court to make a decision, right? The judge, the justice, the judges, the justices. You're trying to get them to find in your favor, make the decision for your client, help your attorney, right? Get what they need. So you're trying to get them to do something, to make a decision. And they make their decision based on, and I've kind of just given a very shorthand way to think about this, the facts of the case, right? The specific facts of your specific case, you know, was the light red? Was it green? You know, were they speeding? Were they not? You know, how long were they married? All those kinds of things. They also make the decision based on previous cases, existing laws, existing statutes, which you might think of, depending on your experience, very broadly as stare decisis, right? That we're going to kind of base things on what has come before us, and we're going to fit it in with that legal framework. So, and there's some deep theory behind that you don't have to worry about right now, but fitting it in with what's already there and using that to prove your point that there were these two other cases, and so therefore we should do what they did in those two other cases, or there's already a statute. So broadly, kind of stare decisis. Then they also make their decision based on theories of law or their philosophy of the law, and that's known as jurisprudence. So, you know, if you really study Supreme Court justices, that's where you hear more about this. You know, are they originalists? Are they a textualist? Are they a legal social justice? Are they law and economics? Are they legal realism? You know, all these different theories that, again, go very deep, and some of you might be really into that. But I would say, if I, you know, just broadly, these three things are really what the court, the judges base their decisions on. And you can't really control the facts of the case. You know, you're going to be handed whatever you're handed. And you can't necessarily control the theory of law that each judge or justice might bring. But what you can really go deep on is what's out there in terms of cases and statutes and laws and different ways you can weave together your argument. So you have to go find that, right? And that's what we'll be showing you how to do, how to find it, how to understand it. But I also wanted to mention what doesn't come into play. And, you know, we talk about this in kind of the intro classes, like, what do judges not use to make their decisions? And I think it's helpful because it's really different from other research. They don't take into consideration public opinion data or polling data. You know, it's not like, well, if 60% of the country wants to do XYZ, then that law would get passed or a judge would decide a case that way. You know, polling, demographics, you know, that shows up in elections, right? You know, because the majority of the people, whatever, however that works out, will elect someone and they become the person, right, that goes to the legislature or that becomes the governor or the president. But the court doesn't have to think that way. They don't have to go, well, what do the majority of the people want, right? So they're not concerned with it so much. It's also one of the reasons that sometimes the disfavored opinion, or the what we would call the minority opinion, you know, like the opinion that not many people agree with in society, can have a good chance of doing well in the court system, because the justices aren't going to be concerned with, well, only two people are on your side. The court system might say, well, if that's the right thing to do, if that fits in with our legal framework, then that is what we're going to do. It doesn't matter if only two people, you know, feel that way. So that's why sometimes you can have a decision come from the court that, depending on where you're at, you might think, well, that's weird. Like, that's not a lot of people agree with that. Well, you know, that's not what they're focused on. Another thing that might surprise you is the court doesn't necessarily concern itself with like costs, economics, cost benefit analysis in the way you might think. You know, if you're a business, you're like, well, should we do this, whatever, XYZ, should we create this widget? You know, some of you are interested in having your own businesses. You're going to be looking heavily at the economic data, at the cost data, you know, what are the numbers? you know, the court doesn't take that into consideration. They're not like going, well, you know, if we can afford it, we'll give, you know, you vegan meals in prison or something. You know, the court would simply say, well, does it fit in with the jurisprudence? Is it the right thing to do? Does it fit in with our Constitution, our statutes? And if it does, then you have to provide vegan meals. And P.S., I don't know, I'm just making that up, you know, or vegetarian meals in jail. They're not concerned with, well, it's too costly, so you just get like a ham sandwich like everybody else or something. Or, you know, that's not the focus, isn't the cost expenditure. So you can think of many things, like if you're a local school board or if you're a business, you might really consider cost in the decision making, right? But if someone has a court case and they're challenging this, the research they're going to do isn't going to be, well, this is an expensive solution, so you should or shouldn't do it. It's going to be, is this the right thing? Does it fit in with our existing case law, our existing statutes? How does that play? Another thing to consider, you know, the court doesn't really look at, you know, how hard is something, how easy is something, you know, to complete, to get done. You know, that's not their concern, which you could sort of say it's a little bit removed, you know, from reality in that place. You know, they're not a planning commission. They're, you know, they're not a board of trustees, you know, trying to decide like what product launch should we do, or, you know, if we change the logo, it could be bad for this, or it would cost us a lot of money there, or, well, if we have to move the freeway over here, it's going to cost a lot of money or back the project up by 6 months, so we shouldn't do it. They're not thinking about it that way. They're really just focused on the legal standards, the cases, the statutes, the Constitution, the administrative regulations, and then it's up to the other groups to kind of figure out what next, right? And that is a little bit of like a tension, you know, between some of the branches there. I know I've just been going on and on. Are there any questions? You guys can chat them in or even unmute yourself and go wild. It's just totally good. You're fine.
I'm not getting any questions, so.
Okay, I'll just keep going. We're almost done. And then I wanted to put this idea of like the big picture. So again, I'm always like forest for the trees, because sometimes I think you can get lost in the trees, right? So I want to always back you up and kind of let's see the whole view here. So remember, right? The basic role of the judicial branch is interpreting the law. The executive branch executes, carries out the law, and the legislative branch makes the law, creates the law. So with that, that might help you understand a little bit. They're not there to make law necessarily. They're not there to carry out the law. Like, let's figure out how you should do a vaccine program. Well, I don't know. You know, that's up to another branch of government. The judicial branch is really just there to interpret the law, tell you what it means. And some of you with different languages can probably understand that. I think this PowerPoint is uploaded and available, the slides, but let us know if not, and we'll make sure it is at the end. So they're really just looking at, you know, what does it mean? Is it legitimate? Does it fit in with the existing laws? Does it fit in with the framework? So you will sometimes hear justices who are up for Senate confirmation hearings say things like, I absolutely would support, you know, or find something constitutional even if I disagreed with it, if it fit in with the existing framework of laws. You know, I'm not a lawmaker, right? I'm just here to analyze and really interpret. So when you think of it that way, it makes sense that the court isn't necessarily like, their ability to solve problems is limited in some ways and very expansive in others. And that can kind of help you understand their role and why they're really focused on looking at what's been done in the past, looking at the current framework of laws, looking at, you know, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and really seeing, you know, how do these things fit together, and not being focused on, well, is it cost efficient? You know, like, can you do it? I don't know, can you? And so that's why the research you do is really focused on just pulling those resources that are persuasive to the court and that speak to the court. And in some cases, they have to follow, right? Depending on the different court systems that you're in. So, final note, legal research is really, really fun. I think you feel really empowered when you can find an answer to a question, when you can read a case or read a statute and understand, or start to see like, oh, I'm here, this is what I need to do next, you know, for a family law case, or for something, you know, that I want to kind of investigate for my child's education. You know, there's a lot of really empowerment that you can feel understanding what's happening to you, understanding what's happening to your client. It is specialized, but once you know, it's not secret. It's not unknowable. It's just specialized. And so once you understand those couple basic things, you're just going to be good to go. But yeah, it is a little bit, until you know some of the basics, it would be hard to do legal research. But once you know some of the basics, you can walk into any online environment or any public law library, law school library, county law library, and find what you need. And that's really exciting. So finding answers to your questions. I also want to say, I know for a lot of people, you hear research, library, and it's like, gah, do you feel the stress? You know what I mean? You might be having other languages going on. And so I just want you guys to know that Professor Manzano and I are so excited about this. We don't want you to get discouraged. We don't want you to get stressed out. I share in some of my classes that I felt like my legal research experience in law school was so stressful, and it kind of like killed the joy. You know, we don't want to do that. We want to make this fun. And whether this is your last kind of stop, you know, because you're doing paralegal, or if you end up going forward into law school, that you'll have a really great foundation to kind of just go into any situation and be able to find what you want and feel confident in what you find. So it shouldn't, you know, we don't want it to be stressful. And then my final little piece of advice is get a legal dictionary. I think you can even find them online. You know, you can get a Black's Law dictionary, probably used for like $8 to $10, little paperback. You don't need to get the big hardback, just get a small paperback. I don't think the edition is important at all, because for the most part, the definitions haven't changed. It might be that, you know, if there was like a new term, but I don't think the edition matters. Find any Black's Law dictionary. And then just start looking things up, looking words up, because you have to understand that we're going to use words, you know, just like learning a new language, that sound familiar, but mean something totally different. And then there's lots of Latin thrown in, a little French thrown in, you know, there's just all kinds of fun and shenanigans. So, you know, have a legal dictionary, or don't be afraid to look up things online. Don't be afraid to read something more than once. That's another thing I really preach in my intro class. I often read legal sources, cases, multiple times. I don't even expect to read it probably less than 2 or 3 times if I'm studying it. So don't let that turn you away if you have to read it more than once. Like, expect to read it 2 or 3 times, you know, and then if you only end up reading it 3, great. But if you end up reading it 5, perfect. So kind of let go of that stress or ego, you know, and be comfortable reading it multiple times, because there's so many layers to understand here. So I'm super excited for this class. I know Professor Manzano is super excited. And so Rick, anything you want to add? Or I don't know if the chats, let's see here.
They wanted to know if they have to go to school computers for research. No, you will have access later in the semester to our LexisNexis. We have licenses for you. They are at no additional cost to you, because we were able to get some grant funding for it again this semester. Actually, some of the training that we do is on Lexis, and you will have the license, and as long as you have an internet connection, you will have access to that style of research. But we also do, you know, not all research is done on which you're going to find out in the first few weeks. You don't necessarily need to have LexisNexis to do legal research. First things we're going to go through is how to find cases, how to find statutes, how to find administrative regulations on the internet. Which is funny, because, you know, Lexis costs a lot of money. And when you go to using the California court system webpage to look up one of their cases, it pops you into Lexis, and you don't have to sign in and have a license there. But we do have those for you. I have some modules they're putting together. I haven't been able to put them in the course yet because they're looking at having them done by the end of August because they're revamping them. I saw the old ones; they were good, but they're updating them just to make the research fact patterns a little more current because the other ones were 3 years old. They wanted to keep them real current. We're actually getting access to what they use in law school. They're giving us, it's called, when you see Lexis Law School, yeah, you're in the right place. But that comes later, about 5 weeks from now, so don't worry about it yet. Okay.
And we should point out that the Academic Computing Center, the ACC, is open at the campus. And I think you have to make appointments, but you are able to go to the computing center, the computer lab, which is in our business division building. I know if you can remember back, but so if that is something that you need. So I think most everything you will, obviously you want to have a computer, and keep in mind, if you don't have a computer, send us an email because there are the digital dons is what they call it. So there are ways for you to get a laptop loaner. So please, let us know, and maybe we can send, it might already be posted, a link to Digital Dons. But yeah, so obviously we won't be requiring you to go physically into a library like normally we would do some of that, but given that everything is kind of unavailable right now, we're focusing on approximating and really just jumping into the online tools that are out there.
And if I notice not everybody's showing me your beautiful faces and things, which I really would like to see. I really would. So if anybody, thank you. If anybody needs the cameras and the microphones or anything of that nature, I don't guarantee I can get them, but they have a few available. So if you would email me and say that you need something, I can find out from our dean if they are available still and send you to the right place to get the materials. It's important on the ACC to remember you do have to make an appointment. I think they told us they were doing them in 2-hour blocks. And then what they will do is everybody will leave. They will completely sanitize the place and then bring in the next 2-hour blocks. And the dean showed us a picture. They've actually, if you remember the lab that was on the first floor across from the division office, every other station and like in front and back and stuff for social distancing is shrink wrapped. So, so you don't, and you have to wear a mask. You have to, use the sanitizer because we do not want to be a source of any outbreaks in Orange County, especially since I believe, and I was only reading the little caption that you get on your news feed. I haven't sat down and read any of the articles yet, that Orange County got taken off the watch list this week, which is, good, because my daughters have not let me leave the house since March and I'm going crazy. Anyways, so I can't wait till that part's over. Alrighty.
Well, I think that is all that, that's, again, today's just kind of an introduction, and I will give me like a week or so, like I might have it done this week, but I will try to get you guys your Lexis passwords. So I'll post an announcement whenever I get that done, but just know that it'll come from Lexis, like your account. And then, and it's not free, but we're able to, we have a grant to pay for it. I know it's kind of crazy. They charge even for the students to have access to Lexis. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll wait a week or two, but that'll be coming for us. And Maritza hopefully just shared a Black's Law PDF for you guys. That's legit. So here, yeah, so they're all over. And that's awesome.
In one of my other classes. Make sure it's
okay. Yeah, so maybe we can add it to this one, but so I don't know, do you guys have any questions for us? I mean, I think we're okay to like let them end a little early and work on all their items. And maybe I'll give it another minute and then I'll stop recording. So any questions or anything? Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.